Our ancient word today is taken from the Gospel of John, chapter 12, selected verses. The next day, the large crowd that had come to the feast heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, crying out, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel." And Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, just as it is written, "Fear not, daughter of Zion. Behold, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt." The crowd that had been with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to bear witness. So the Pharisees said to one another, "You see that you are gaining nothing. Look, the world has gone after him." Jesus said to the crowd, "The light is in you for a little longer. Walk while you have the light." The contemporary word is Palm Sunday was a type of protest march by Leah Shad. Palm Sunday marks the beginning of Holy Week, when Jesus entered Jerusalem riding a donkey amid crowds of people waving palm branches. This procession would eventually lead to his crucifixion and resurrection on Easter Sunday. But if churches today wave green fronds and shout Hosanna without understanding what Jesus was doing, we miss the political significance of this event. Jesus didn't ride into Jerusalem on a chariot or a fabulously decorated horse, because those were symbols of war. Instead, Jesus sat on a donkey, a simple beast of burden used by the common people. Riding a donkey was a form of cheeky, self-deprecating humor that disrupted the narrative of political and military power. In a sense, the processional into Jerusalem was a kind of protest march. Jesus rejected military pageantry to be in solidarity with the oppressed. In this way, Palm Sunday unveils the futility of foolish spectacle used to fluff the image of brutal, corrupt, and violent regimes. This ends our reading for the day.
So our invitation to transformation today is a familiar one for any of us who've been around church for a lifetime or part of a lifetime. It's also, in addition to being an invitation to transformation, it's a commentary on the human condition. What we know about the time of the gospel is that there were a few who had great power and many who had to live their lives as best they could in what was allowed to them. For me, one thing about this passage is that it asks us to hold multiple interpretations of our traditions at the same time. I remember as a child that it was waving palms and celebration, and I didn't associate the whole rest of the story. And that is still a good and true interpretation. But yes, there are others as well. During Lent, we've been hearing from the Gospel of John, and we're going to continue in the Gospel of John for a few more weeks. And we've been hearing Jesus' I am statements, and we'll hear a new one today. But we had heard about being the light of the world and the door and the gate and the resurrection and the life and the bread of life and the good shepherd and the way and the truth and the life and the true vine. That was last week, the true vine. And today, we'll hear, you say that I am a king. So those I am statements carried us through, and so does this sense of abiding, this sense of being there, allowing ourselves to be touched by the stories and the traditions, allowing ourselves to talk back to them, allowing ourselves to disagree with each other and with interpreters over the last 2,000 years, and also to agree. There's 4 versions of this story, and only in John are palms mentioned. Otherwise, they're branches or branches of trees or spreading their cloaks in the road. So I did go out of my way this week to find some palm branches from a friend's tree, which, as it turns out, they're probably been growing on the tree for a couple years. They've got some vintage to them. And it was a challenge to find a way to share those palms in a way that conveyed the delight of children, because they seem so tired. As maybe some of us do too. I'd like to begin with a couple of blessings for the palms. Bless these parade palms, O God of celebration, and may they remind us of the simple joys of living. Bless these protest palms, O God of justice. May they remind us that empire is not a thing of the past, and may they help us to be bold and brave. And also bless these funeral palms, O God of comfort. May they remind us of the week and the road that lie ahead. And may they encourage us in our own times of grief and pain. So palms, we've got the palms. I retitled my sermon several times this weekend and ended up being King or No King. But why is Jesus a king? Why is Jesus a king? He's named as a king in all the Gospels. And here in John, behold, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt, as Leah Shade told us was, I think she called it cheeky, a cheeky demonstration. We have a sense in our larger Christian tradition of a triumphant king, of arriving with power and pomp. It's not really quite that way, because Jesus did not fit that mold of a all-powerful ruler or a military leader to defeat the enemy in battles. And in the Gospels, at least, the stories we have don't really fit with the much later imagery of empire that we get in our Christian tradition. We have in the Gospel of John the interview between Pilate and Jesus. And Pilate asks, "So you are a king?" Jesus answers, "You say that I am a king. You say that I am a king." And our hymn this morning also a lot of kingly language, and also Redeemer language, the one sent by God to save the people, the Messiah. Thou art the King of Israel, thou David's royal son, thou good and gracious King, all glory, laud, and honor, to whom the lips of children made sweet hosannas ring. Why hosannas? Hosanna means save us. And over the centuries, our Christian theology has developed quite detailed dogma describing just what this means. And of course, salvation is interpreted in many ways. And sometimes I wonder if this conception of one Savior gets us in trouble in our collective lives. Shade reminds us that there's a political significance to Jesus riding in on a donkey. John Dominic Crossan and Marcus Borg imagine Jesus riding in one gate on a donkey and the representative of the emperor riding in, that's the east gate, and riding in the west gate on a big war horse. There's a contrast being made here. Yesterday was the third No Kings protest here in the US and in a few other places around the world, and there were more than 3,000 events scheduled all over the US and territories, and I heard of one in London, and I'm sure there were ones in other cities. And I mentioned in an email to you all that it seemed quite poignant to me that the No Kings protests came the day before our Palm Sunday celebration. We could have ridden donkeys to our No Kings protests, whether we went there in our minds or in our bodies, as a symbol of humility and peace. And there were many local events. I actually went to one. I've been uneasy about this, but I went to the one at the Depot Plaza. I ran into Harriet and Bob there. I hear some people were in Petaluma and Richmond, and I don't know where else. Does anybody have something I haven't named that they'd want to mention? No. Okay. So king or no king? One of the commentators that I've been spending a lot of time listening to is the historian of totalitarianism, Tim Snyder. And he recently talked about our current political predicaments, what he describes as threats to our democratic institutions, among them our electoral system. He always goes out of his way to say that one way to resist is to participate in nonviolent protests, such as these No Kings marches. But there are many ways. And he reminds us that there's an election coming, which is not a normal election, in our US sense of a normal election. Speaking of Hosanna, he talks a bit about the SAVE Act, or the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or Save America Act. I don't need to go any detail. If you've got the bandwidth for it, you already know that it's essentially voter suppression and surveillance measures. But one of the things that Snyder brings to us in light of elections or any of the many human conditions that we notice that we think might better be different. He says it's not how you save the world by having one person do everything. No. But if we each find our own place to be, and we do that steadily, consistently, it's going to be okay, he says. And part of what we need to do is to build a big coalition that goes from the far left to the center right. All the shades of people. Because to meet this moment, we can't be doctrinaire about what the right policy is or the right attitude toward one thing or another. It's meeting the moment and ensuring that we have free and fair elections. As an historian, he's read a lot about these things, and he says, the first thing to know is that authoritarian regimes, the change to an authoritarian regime often fails. And a second thing he asks us to remember, which he says again and again, is it's not all on you. Do your little thing, it will be fine. Everybody regularly in cooperation with other people. And I was thinking about this in light of our church, because I know that many of us have ways that we express ourselves in the world in response to the conditions of the moment. But I was wondering if, as a church, there was a way, is there something that we bring as a church that's different, that we can bring to this time when so many people are under stress? I've been reminded by many of you that the most important thing is that our worship services be times of rest and renewal, and times when we connect, times when we replenish our spirits. And with that in mind, I apologize for being political today, but I did it, but I do apologize. But it's not all on any one of us. It's not all on our little church. But what can we do as a little church? How can we gather in our ways? There have been great postcard campaigns in the past, and that might be just what we might do now. Maybe you have ideas too. I'm just starting to think this way. But our work last week with the Sphere for Earth Day, to me, is a piece of it. You might remember our theme song was Weave Us Together, and we'll sing that again during our gratitude time today. Jesus said, I am the vine and you are the branches, and we imagined ourselves as the branches. And we had a big sphere, which we'll bring out here again today, in which we could weave some branches in as symbolic of weaving together very different people from very different places who are committed to being part of something whole. And so I think that is my theme for the spring, is the vine and branches, the weaving us together. And so I hope that you'll consider thinking about those ideas with me. So I don't have a big, good conclusion this morning. I just want to read again a piece from Steve Garna's Holmes that we heard last week. And this is as we imagine ourselves as the branches. And it goes like this. Branch of the vine, find a gentle piece of earth. Sit and be present. Sit still long. Let the wind hold you, breathe you in and out. Amen.